So you could take the same joke or forget about that. Even take a joke that is not going to be offensive in any way, but it depends on who's saying it. So if a guy in that low tier says it, somehow he'll be a creep, even if it's nothing to do with creepiness.
Right. Hey guys, welcome to the Emily and Todd Podcast. Today we're talking about how dating will look very different for men depending on how women perceive him. Before we get started, please remember to like and comment under this video as it does really help with the YouTube algorithm. So Todd, I think dating in general is difficult, but I do think that there's like three groups of men that experience a different level of difficulty. We want to talk about that today. So do you think that there's a group of men that have it easy, a group of men that have it sort of in between, and then a group of men that have it really hard?
I would restate that by saying that a small percentage of men have it super easy. A large group of men have it difficult, and then a smaller group, but not as small as the top group, have it pretty much impossible at this point in time. If we're talking about cold approach and dating apps.
I mean, it's what we hear from our followers on our channel, and you think about similar channels to us and what we talk about, there's the whole manosphere. I mean, it's huge on YouTube. And that must be because there is a need for it.
Yes.
So, I mean, it makes sense to me. And because of all the individual men that I hear from, it makes sense that the largest group of men are the ones that are struggling quite a bit.
Yes. Well, I would say that it's probably the top 10 to 20% of guys have it. And this is being generous as well. I think dating for them is something that they don't have an issue with at all, and they don't even see a problem with dating because they're kind of the blue pill chads. He kind of using those Gen Z terminology, but essentially what that means is that the way that women treat them is so well that they wouldn't have a need to go onto the manosphere. Does that make sense?
It does, and we've seen it in real life. I know you've spoken about guys that you've talked to that are young and good looking, and they have no idea that the manosphere even exists. Exactly. They don't know what the blue pill, red pill, or black pills are.
No.
And it makes sense because they're doing just fine in what they're doing. They have no desire to learn about it or need to learn about it.
Yeah, exactly. That's like if you think about anything else in life, if it's not within your peripheral, why would you research it? You know? So, for example, like, since I don't have children, I'm not going to research baby care. Why would I spend my time and effort into something that doesn't affect me?
Exactly. And Google knows that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's the same type of thing with these guys, is that they're just, kind of blissfully ignorant.
Right. So do you have a theory as far as the pills and like which ones have sort of developed based on these groups of guys?
Well, I think we should preface that by saying that most guys, I think, are, if I had to put a guesstimate on it, I would say probably 70% of guys are blue-pilled, just because they haven't come into contact with the manosphere and they don't even know of the pills. I've spoken to a lot of young guys at the gym and just asked them if they ever heard of the pill theories and have you ever watched anything on the manosphere on YouTube, and they're like, no, I haven't. Men are blue pilled, meaning that they haven't really even come in contact with a lot of this material yet. So they don't really, they may not be having, they're having suboptimal dating lives, but at the same time, they don't understand why that is, or they haven't explored that or researched that yet.
That makes sense, especially if they're young enough, right? And I could see also if they're kind of in that middle, in between difficulty level group. I would say that for guys that have a lot of trouble over a long period of time, they're probably the most likely to learn about the manosphere.
Yes.
And to seek those answers.
Yeah. And I think what ends up happening is that, so you have this let's just throw out this number, but it's high. That's blue pilled. They're getting this messaging from their parents and, media, that type of thing, where, it's so important to just be yourself and timing is everything, and she'll come into your life when you least expect it. Those type of things. It'll just happen,
like a Disney movie.
Yeah.
And I would say that most women are absolutely unaware of the other pills, like as far as the red or black pill. So they're essentially blue pilled.
Yes.
I know even me, and I was in the dating world, like not having the easiest time, like definitely hitting struggles in that I wasn't meeting the right person.
Yeah.
And that's what made me start my TikTok. And I was totally unaware of the pills, even at the start of my TikTok. And I would even say like midway through. It wasn't really until starting this podcast with you, Todd, that like I knew in detail red versus black pill, especially.
That's because I hammered your head over it.
I know.
So
I learned a lot.
But I wanted to I wanted to let you know, kind of what the male perspective was. So I think the first situation is that you have a blue-pilled guy who's struggling, and then he probably stumbles upon the red pill. And what happens is that he'll either kind of go down the PUA route, like the Kezia Noble route, like that, because she sells a great game. I wanted to go out in the street and try to pick up a woman, and as soon as she was done, she's very motivational.
Like yes,
I can imagine.
Pep talk.
Yeah, exactly. And if you go to one of her courses, she'll have a wingman for you waiting. Although no disrespect to Kezia, she was a great guest. And I do think that she's very intelligent, and she also provides some useful information as well. But I think, so it's either kind of that, or it's the status, muscles, money route. That, the kind of Richard Coopers of the world, or Rollo Tomasi's kind of come up is saying that if you're kind of in that normie range, if you are able to build up your status, your wealth, your money, your social circles, all those type of things, that then and that's what you should focus on, that then the women will just kind of come.
Yeah, with the thought being that if you just build up that outward examples of your value, it'll actually be visible to women how valuable you are.
Exactly.
And then you'll be desired more.
Yes. And then I think guys will go down those patterns, those paths, and they won't work.
Yeah.
Because especially if you're in the lower tier category of guy, then like, let's be honest, like you'd have to do 1,000 cold approaches. And this is something that may be a little controversial, but I would recommend for any guy who's going to do a cold approach. First of all, I think it is good to practice that, but you should do a cold approach of somebody who is on your level or below, because otherwise you're just kind of really setting yourself up for failure. That may be controversial, and I don't think that applies to cold approach. I don't think that applies to warm approach.
Right. Because we've talked about before how cold approach, the likelihood of actually being successful in it is pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
So then you mix in the nerves that you're going to feel with somebody that you're like really attracted to. And especially if you view them as being like higher than you as far as looks or whatever type of value system you're using, that's going to be even harder. And I would think that it's going to hurt quite a bit, even when that's a no. Although, what do you think if he fails at approaching somebody successfully that he views as lower in status as him or lower in looks as him?
Yeah. I mean, what I would tell guys is that at this point, because of the fact that women have so many options, that the reality is that she probably already has 5 guys she's talking to and doesn't want a 6th, even if she is lower.
That's a good way to look at it, because then it's more about her than him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have to internalize that
as
an issue with him.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say, for that guy, just to keep trying because it builds up your social skills. And so those guys who, kind of try these situations. And then the other one, which we discussed about in our money episode, is that in order for most guys to really build any wealth at all, like that takes years. There's very few people that can, accumulate that in a quick period of time. So that's not a really good strategy as far as attracting women.
Right. I think that's pretty clear. I mean, that's why a lot of younger women will go for an older guy, and it's because he has built up more status and money than somebody that is her age.
Exactly.
And a lot of women don't realize that, but, for the guys that are the same age as her, if they just give it some time, dating will probably get a lot easier in another decade.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Emily, because I think about when I was in my early 20s and just how difficult things were. But then when I got to my late 20s and early 30s, then for me it was kind of on easy mode. Because I had kind of grown into my looks. I'd been in the gym. I had completed, my degrees. I had a little bit of money at that point. And so I was viewed much differently, but I was still able to dip down into early 20s. So there's definitely hope for people. And, and I was always a normie. It wasn't like anything changed with my looks significantly. It was more the fact that I had some status and money.
Yeah. So here's my question for you. If you were more on easy mode in your 30s and 40s, when did you start learning about the pills and the manosphere?
Wow. We're going there? Okay.
We're going there.
Okay. Well, honestly, it was because I was in a long-term relationship with somebody who was significantly younger than myself. And ironically, we actually met on Tinder. And this was before Tinder really got bad, as far as like all how everything was disproportionate. And we had dated for 4 years. And it was a really good relationship for most of that time. But what ended up happening is, and this will be very telling to our viewers, but some guy that lived in her town who had seen her at the pool DM'd her on Instagram, and she ended up monkey branching onto him because he was a couple of years older than her. And
so closer in age.
Yeah, closer in age. And this was somebody that she always had a crush on. So here's also part of the story that our viewers might think is interesting, is that so when we started dating, there was definitely, I would say, a looks disparity. And believe it or not, I was the one who was probably like higher SMV. But because she had never been exposed to gym culture or diet or anything like that, she really leaned into that with me. And she looks maxed her way out of my life, because I would say, honestly, she went from, she went from a 5, so she was average, wasn't unattractive at all, probably to a 7.5.
Oh my God. See, that's amazing. Just from working out and getting into shape, how it can really change, especially for a young woman.
Exactly. And so where I started off, I would consider myself a 5, and maybe for my age, I could say I'm higher than that, but that doesn't matter. That's kind of, when people say you look great for your age, like that's always kind of a backhanded compliment.
It is almost,
right? Yeah. But she always had this kind of weird, she liked older men,
Okay, yeah.
And I think that there is a group of women that like older men, and not just because of the fact I have resources, but because I'm more mature than most guys her age, that type of thing. But so I had that experience, and it was honestly and it also coincided with another really traumatic situation in my life at the same time. And so it was really difficult. And that's when I kind of started to look into this and try to understand, kind of how this could happen. And then once I did and I got educated, then it made perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. And it probably was very helpful to you to know that, other men were struggling with the same thing or had experienced a similar thing, and to hear advice about it on top of that, I'm sure that felt validating.
Yeah, it felt validating for sure. And, it also just taught me so much about myself and the current dating market. And I'll have to say also that this was also demonstrative of how quickly the dating apps have changed. Because we had met in 2017, which was 6 years ago. And it was, a completely different situation where I was getting matches all the time, and I was still 47 years old. Where now if I went on, I don't have Tinder, but if I went on Tinder, it would be a completely different situation. And honestly, I've aged a bit, but nothing significant, in that time period.
Right. So the difference would be due to the changes itself on Tinder and what it looks like and the dynamics within that dating app.
Yes.
And honestly, in most dating apps.
Exactly. But I think most guys kind of go down some kind of similar path.
Yeah, I hear similar things, especially post-divorce, and they're working on co-parenting or some kind of rough breakup, I feel like, is when most guys kind of turn to this type of information.
Yeah. I think the thing about the manosphere, though, is that there's so much toxicity in it that you really have to figure out who are the people that you can trust and who are the people who are just trying to make money or are honestly, lean towards being misogynistic.
Yeah. I mean, I find that very interesting. Some of the most popular podcasts and creators, they're very young. And I find it so interesting that people can relate to that, at all ages, because I would think that it's unrelatable to somebody that's in their 40s. And we're talking about how girls dress going to clubs.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's that many men that are really actually experiencing that. Is the primary concern. Yeah. But it inflates, I think, some of the things that are kind of flashy and that sound like terrible things or scenarios. And so, it draws you in. And so you want to listen to it. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of people. But I don't know how useful some of that content is.
Yeah. Well, I think there's almost kind of two categories. I think there's content that is educational and that can really be helpful to men. And then I think there's others content which is wildly popular, which really kind of upsets me in a way a lot, because I look at, and I'll call out names, I don't care. But there's this channel called Araco TV, and it's essentially this guy, British guy, you can tell he's bright, but he just does reaction videos to TikToks. And then just kind of gives his own take on it. But it's most of the time it's just bashing women.
Yeah.
But he's getting per video more views than we've gotten on our whole channel after 6 months of doing this.
Yeah.
And I think that we've been very meticulous about research and topics and try to really put out good content. It's just something that I think a lot of guys go for that kind of entertainment piece because it's such a cope. If you can blame women for the problem, then you don't have to work on yourself either.
I can understand that, and especially if he's pulling TikToks of women that are just saying outrageous things, and they are really poor examples of women, and especially the average woman. It's just, it reinforces what a man might already be experienced in the past with, and which is a negative, right? If he's experienced terrible heartbreak and then he sees a woman on TikTok, saying a similar thing that he experienced in her own light and it's hurtful to him, he's going to be reinforced in thinking that maybe all women are like this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not the reality. And the reality, too, is that there's even women who are on that high tier that are, just stunningly beautiful, that can also be very intelligent and have great personalities. And yeah, that might be less likely than, like the average woman who's kind of had to work, to build herself up in order for socially. But the thing is that I think it really goes back to, again, what type of guy you are when you interact with these women.
We've seen plenty of videos on TikTok where it's the flip, right? Where it's a man that's not really a good example of a good man, and then the woman cuts in and bashes him.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty pervasive on TikTok. So it does sort of balance it out when we can hear from the other side.
Yeah, exactly. But I think guys get lost in this a lot.
Yeah.
And that's where it ends up becoming problematic versus finding creators that are able to give you kind of both sides of the spectrum. It really depends on, kind of two factors is, kind of what your experience has been like in the real world. And then, you can kind of easily find where you fall within those three categories. And the best way to do that is just to see how women treat you.
Right. That's what we were saying from the beginning,
Yeah.
right? It's really your dating experience is going to depend on how a woman treats you.
Exactly.
Because that's how she perceives you. And I've always said that, like, especially for the cold approach, right? If you approach a woman and she makes it really easy for you, it doesn't matter what you say.
Yes.
It is because she's into you, like from the beginning.
Exactly.
Probably very attracted to you.
Yes.
So you can't really mess it up.
Yeah, it's really hard. I would say the only caveat to that is that woman has so many options that might be a reason to then, not pursue things or be flaky or whatever. So that's where I think even the Chads should try to work on decent game and be able to have a good conversation with somebody and have the courage to approach. But I definitely agree that if you're in that position, and I've been in that position several times in my life, and it's such a different experience. Women treat you so well that it's almost surreal in a way because you could say something really outrageous or stupid and it's perceived as funny.
Yeah, the laugh.
Exactly.
Yeah, versus the opposite, which would be like her getting offended.
Yes.
Right.
And so you could take the same joke or forget about that. Even take a joke that is not going to be offensive in any way, but it depends on who's saying it. So if a guy in that low tier says it, somehow he'll be a creep, even if it's nothing to do with creepiness. Right.
The difference there is not in what he's saying. It's whether she's attracted to him or not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I know we discussed this a little bit before, but I think what really is happening is that women have leveled up so well that for them, they have the opportunity to be like men have been forever and end up seeing looks as something that is much more valued than it used to be.
Totally. And I think that's a result of the other things becoming less valuable, right?
Yes.
So I would say status is still pretty high up there.
Well, status is number one,
Yeah.
but the percentage of guys that have real status is only, 0.01% of the population.
Right. I think most women probably just want a certain level of status. And then it also kind of depends on where she's at with that. But I would definitely say that money does not matter as much. And I know that's part of status. But if we were to separate out those two, it's that money is less important because more women are in the workplace and they're making their own money. So a lot of women will say nowadays that are making good money that they would rather have a guy that they're really attracted to.
Yeah, well, and the unfortunate thing is that they also do kind of have that expectation that you're going to be making six figures.
Oh, yes, the expectation of six figures.
Right, where that's, such a small percentage of the population that most guys just get left out because of that. And, that's something that's always been important to women. And before, it was because it was necessary. Because women either were working very low-paying jobs comparatively to men, or they weren't in the workforce at all.
Yeah.
And so they needed to depend on someone. So that is going to trump looks. It's just Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right. Because if you have a one-person income, you need that amount of money so that she can have children, and watch them. Whereas today's day and age, each individual could be making $50,000, which is closer to the average, and still be able to have children in that way.
Yes. But you'd have to have that dual income.
Right.
Because just living on $50,000 alone, if you had children, that wouldn't really cut it for most places in the country, but especially if you lived in a big city.
Right. Women might still have like that benchmark of $100,000. And there's always going to be women out there that we've seen on TikTok and on YouTube saying that they want something even more ridiculous and they expect a man to make $300,000 or $500,000 a year. But I think for the average woman, it's just more of that benchmark for whatever reason is $100,000.
Yeah.
But anything beyond that for the average woman, like she really doesn't care that much about, especially if she has her own career.
Yeah. But I would say that if you make $100,000 a year, that gives you that status that comes along with that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Because in order to do that, you either have to have a very successful business, you have to be a doctor, or you have to... you're not going to be your kind of average guy, because most average guys make 50,000, half that, versus the full $100,000.
There is something about it being like a status mark, to be able to say that you make six figures or you're with somebody that makes six figures.
Of course,
because it is very different than even if he was making $85,000.
Yeah.
And what does that spread across as far as an increase in monthly income? Like, it's not that much. It's not life-changing, that difference.
Yeah.
But for some reason, that is tied to a certain level of status, which she is prioritizing.
Yeah.
But I do definitely agree that, especially because of how like dating is set up today and with dating apps, that looks definitely matters more to women today compared to 20, 30 years ago.
Know what's interesting, though? I just saw TikTok. I didn't send it to you. I should have, though, because I didn't think we would talk about this much. But they went to Ireland, and they interviewed women and about what their preferences were. And they really tried to kind of stick it to just being physical. And they pressed them on that, because a lot of them were virtue signaling, saying, depends on the character, and things like that.
Personality.
But, character was used a lot. But they pushed them, and they said, no, just like with the guy, like, does he have to have a lot of muscles and, things like that? And most of them were, no, that's pretty off-putting, to be honest. And but I do like a taller man, between 5'10" and 6 feet would be ideal. But here's the kicker. This video was taped in 1967.
No.
I swear to God, I can send it to you.
Yes, please. I'm interested in that.
And so they were talking about that back then.
Wow.
When they pressed them on the physical preferences, they wanted a tall man, and they didn't care if they were thin, but they didn't want a guy with too much muscle.
So it really kind of matches the preferences that we're hearing today. So maybe women always had those preferences.
Yes.
They just couldn't act on them.
Exactly.
Oh, that is very interesting.
Yes. So that was before I was even born, let alone, and that was, quite consistent throughout the video.
Yeah, it's just with the women's movement, with feminism, women are able to actually act on those things now and look for those physical features. Exactly. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, and I'm a millennial, and I grew up in the age of you can be whatever you want to be. You get to choose. So I definitely had that message pushed on me that like all the girls in my high school, like we were pretty much all going to college because we could be whatever we want to be.
Yeah.
And I know personally for myself, like when I thought of the man that I would want to be with, attraction was high up on the list. It really was, because I knew that I had myself covered as far as like I would be able to support myself. Like I already had that independent mindset even before I went to college, like I was just already on that track. So I could see how a lot of women have felt the same thing being millennials, and I'm sure that has even increased more for Gen Zers.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you think about it, if women have reached equality, which I really believe they have, in our culture, it's something why wouldn't they want to then say, okay, we're equal on everything? Why wouldn't I want to choose the best looking partner I have, just for the same reasons that guys do, as far as saying, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but ultimately from an evolutionary psychology point of view, you want the best chance of your offspring surviving. So you're going to choose the guy who's going to give you that best chance of not only surviving, because that's not as much of an issue in this world, in this day and age, I should say, but doing well in life. The sexy son syndrome.
Right. Yes. We want cute babies.
Yes.
Because we know how looks plays a role, really, in your function through life.
Yeah. So it makes sense that that's the case. And with the advent, or I would say, the mainstream acceptance of hookup culture, then it even makes it to a bigger degree of saying women can date like men would want to date when they're young. I really believe that at the heart, most guys, once they've passed the age of 25, really are kind of looking for more relationships. I think the outliers are the people that aren't looking for that. And so if they're not able to have that success, they're willing to, kind of dip down.
Right. There's so many strategies that I think these guys will use, and that's why a lot of them will go to the red pill first.
Yes.
Because I think there is such a wide spectrum of choices and advice that they can take. And then I think you're right in that, if they're not succeeding even past that point, then, do you think they kind of turn to the black pill?
Yeah, I definitely think they turn to the black pill on. Because I think what's happened is that these guys have tried. They've done all the programs, they've read all the books, they've listened to all the podcasts. They go out in the real world and they really put their effort into things. And they realize that depending on the situation where you are, if you're not in that category, which I would say for the red pill is more of the kind of normie to high tier normie. I would say low tier normies would even, so if we're putting on numbers on it, like my scale, I would say the guys that are 3 to 3.5, they're the guys who are really saying, okay, I have the most flexibility as far as utilizing these concepts in order to kind of get me out of my situation. So I'm going to lean into that. And that could be successful. I think a lot of times you kind of really have to be on that 3.5 to even get recognized. Yeah, just like above average.
Right.
Where it's not like a clear 4 where you're above average on a 5 scale.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, we're talking about the out of 5
Yeah,
scale,
out of
which we
5
talked
scale.
about in the last episode.
Yes.
So just a little bit above average. You kind of have that opportunity to take on some of the advice of the red pill and really utilize it.
Yeah. So if it was, on the 10 scale, I would say probably a 6 or a 7.
Okay.
That type of thing. But I think if you're kind of on that 5 or below, then it's something where most of the time, unless you're in a warm environment, you're going to really, really struggle. And I think that's where the guys gravitate towards the black pill. And that's something where they start learning about, okay, what's going on now, and the whole kind of looks maxing movement, which for, most of human history, guys kind of did the bare minimum because they were relying on their ability to provide and provision and protect a woman. And so that didn't matter that much. But now in 2023, they're realizing it does matter, and that's why guys have to put in just as much effort as women because we're equal now.
I can see that. And what's interesting to me, because I've heard a lot of the advice now from the black pill, what's interesting to me is that it hasn't really spread out to those average guys, or obviously even into the high tier guys, right? Because they don't have the need to know the information. But comparatively to like how women function, Like women know that they need to look good,
Yes.
right? They have to be beautiful. Like that's just
You've known that since you were...
I've known that since I was probably 12 or 11. Who knows?
Probably even
like,
before that. Just
probably like watching Disney movies.
Yeah. Guys have never had to deal with that. Guys have never had to deal with makeup. They never really had to deal with hair on the same level, that type of thing. And now we're in this world that it does matter. It matters a lot. And so guys really have to lean into this.
Right. And it's been that sudden shift in the last few years that like guys didn't grow up learning this. Mm-hmm. And maybe eventually over time, it will sort of translate to boys, thinking about this early on in life, that they do need to do things to make themselves more attractive to women.
Yeah.
But it's just not there yet. So then it's like these guys are hitting their 20s and 30s and just then learning about it if they're having difficulty.
Yes.
Because the old stuff that they're being taught either by their moms because they're being raised by single moms or by their fathers, is not really the correct information or the stuff that will actually improve that child's dating life in future years.
Yeah.
They're probably still more focused on, you just need to get a good job, you need to get your 401k, get your health benefits, and then any woman will be happy to have you.
Yeah.
And that's just not reality right now.
Exactly. And I don't think it was ever that way. I think there was always a component of this. But I think the difference is that back then, that was enough. Mm-hmm. It wasn't easy, but it was enough. Mm-hmm. But now it's not even enough. Mm-hmm. And so that's where guys have to really get everything in line.
Right.
It's not just because if you're this Chad guy, but you're broke and you don't have good social skills, you might be able to attract women for one-night stands or hookups, things like that, which, I wouldn't recommend to do anyways. But as far as longevity, you're going to have struggles too, because a woman is going to want more than that. She wants it all.
Right. Or what I can see is just short-term relationships, right?
Yeah.
So a woman that's maybe his age will date him for a time until she
gets
monkey branches. To somebody that, especially when she's ready to have children, somebody that is a bit more stable and that's more of a provider. That's who she's going to be seeking. And that's really sucky, like if you've had a 3 to 4 year relationship with somebody and then that's how it ends.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like looks will not carry you all the way. Like there really does need to be everything, which is tough to think about because there's still a difference in men versus women in what is expected of them. Yeah. And I've definitely have seen that drastic difference when consuming some of this manosphere content. Like that kind of content for women is not out there. It is not like women telling other women all these 10 things that they need to do to attract a man. Yeah. That's just not pervasive out there because I think that it's just more so still focused on a woman's looks. Yeah. So there's a lot of content with, beauty and style and clothing. Yeah. Like, absolutely. But it's not.
But that's always been there.
It's just always
now
been
it's
there.
just heightened because there was always Cosmo and, magazines like this but now it's just amplified.
Right.
So I have a theory about kind of what you just said. And I think the theory is that most women are kind of given the message that they're okay. It's the world that's the problem. Where I think men are given the message that the world is okay, you're the problem.
Holy cow, I can see that.
And so that's why men are, trying to work so hard on themselves because they feel like they're not adequate enough. Where the message that women are getting, like body positivity, is you're okay. The world needs to accept you for who you are.
So I've definitely have seen that in other messages, in that women are told that they are born with value, right? Because they can birth children. They can bring life into the world. Whereas men, they have to build up their value. They have to show their value in the things that they do and the things that they provide. Yes. So I definitely see that difference, out there in our culture and society. Exactly.
And so... so, bringing it back to the pills again. So if a guy's black-pilled, essentially, so I think that there's misconceptions about the black pill.
Yes.
And I think that's something that we may need to, clear up because there's still, I've heard like large creators just bash the black pill. Do you know what I mean? Because they have this, And there are creators that do believe what I'm about to tell, but they're in the minority, and that is defeatism. And the reality is that there's some creators that do that, but essentially what black pill means is that when it comes to dating, that looks are going to be the most important aspect of it. That's all it's saying.
Right. It's not that they're saying that it's all. So then if you are a 1 on the 0 to 10 scale, that it's just no hope. You can't do anything. Like,
well, it would be, so there would be two different camps. There would be like the person who is on looks maxed. Let's say they're 1
Right.
because they're overweight and they don't take showers and whatever.
which is probably the majority of people.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, exactly.
I would assume that are like under a 5. I would think like the majority of people, just because we're terrible at like staying healthy and maintaining certain things, I would say they're not really looks maxed.
Yes, absolutely. So I would say there's the unlooks maxed guys who are the sub 5 guys. And then there's the true sub 5 guys that are looks maxed, but because they're short, because they have an unattractive face, it doesn't matter how jacked they are. It doesn't matter how much money they have. A woman is not going to be attracted to them. Just like, in the past where it has changed now, to a certain degree, I think men will go there as far as sexually with a woman who's in that category, certain men anyways, but I don't think that they'll want to have a relationship with her. So I think she's not in that much different of a position than the guy is, ultimately.
Right. So why, I'm going to pose this question to you, why do you think sub 5 guys are not just matching with a sub 5 woman? Like, why isn't that happening more often?
Because I think sub 5 women are matching with normie guys.
So even if they're not getting relationships, they're getting something, situationships or hookups.
Exactly.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, so they're doing that, and then the women who are normal are hooking up with the higher level guys, and they're not getting relationships. So women, by getting this messaging saying you're a queen and you can get anybody and you're a 10, all this other stuff, they're setting themselves up for failure too, because what happens is that they end up getting kind of used and discarded versus having long-term relationships. So there's a lot of women out there that want these relationships, but they see it as settling if it's with someone on their level.
I can definitely see that. And especially for like sub 5 guys, when we talk about these men, that's sort of, is that just looks, or is that also talking about like their status and the money they have?
Well, because we're talking, mainly about online and cold approach, it's going to be their looks, because it's something that, the only exception would be is if you're a celebrity or you're somebody well known. Then I think all bets are off. But how many people fit into that category? Like it's so minimal that it shouldn't even be counted, really.
Right. Well, I think like a lot of women would probably just tell these guys that are having difficulty with dating because they're sub 5 in looks. Like, I feel like the general thought out there is that, 1, he can just find a woman that's his looks level, or maybe just like a notch or 2 below. Or 2, like he can just raise his status so much. But that's easier said than done, right?
It's easier said than done. And I really believe that unless he gets super status, which, I really believe too that there's, because there was an interesting experiment a guy did. And I love women. I know when people say that, it's like, no, I love them.
You're a womanizer? No.
I love women. I love my mother. All the people, all the women in my life, I really care about. And so, but he did this experiment where he sent out resumes as a woman and then himself, and the amount with the exact same resume
Qualifications and all that.
She got way more responses back than he did.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. So I think when it even comes to employment nowadays, that women are kind of having the edge on that.
Yeah, I think that would be surprising for a lot of women to hear themselves.
Yeah.
But that's a demonstration that things have really equalized out there.
Exactly. Or women have a better chance of getting in the door. Because I think he sent out 1,000 resumes, and I think for the women, he got maybe 300, and for the guy, he got 20, which is significant, for getting an interview.
I know. Do you remember, like, what type of job or career
it was a professional job, yeah.
Wow.
I think it was an engineering job, but I'd have to go back and look. But yeah, I mean, that's something that never would have happened in the past. So times have definitely changed. So guys who are in the red pill camp saying that if I can just get enough status, then I'll be fine. But I think the reality is that if you're a sub 5 guy, like, unless you have exceedingly high status, it really is not going to make that much of a difference. And that's where, first of all, looks maxing comes into play. And then second of all, thinking really about traveling abroad.
And those are things that are actionable. They're things that, are recommendations to do. And I understand that what you're saying is, like, a lot of creators bash the black pill because of the defeatism. Well, that would indicate that they're not giving advice to do anything, right?
Yeah.
They're just, like, sitting there and complaining, per se.
Yes.
But that's false. If we're hearing that there are these recommendations to do something, then even going to South America, like, that is an action.
Yeah, of course.
That's not really defeatism.
Exactly.
That's not just, sit there and deal with it. This is your reality.
Yeah. And that's why the black pill is the smallest of the groups, because there is that perception out there and there are, again, there's a couple creators in my mind that I've listened to that are really defeatist. And I wouldn't recommend anybody listening to that, because that's just depressing.
Yeah, I know. As a psychologist, like, what do you think of a guy that, like, really is really down on his luck and looks? Is there any benefit to learning or to hearing that kind of content? Like, I could see that to some degree. There could be some validation in that.
Yeah.
But
maybe.
What do you think?
I think that they can be validated for sure. But I also think that the defeatist attitude is something I'm just so opposed against, because I think that guys should try until their last dying breath to improve themselves, and not just for women, but to try to be the best version of themselves. I think that's what gives guys meaning in life. I think that's what gives guys a purpose in life, is trying to grow as an individual. But if you're just in an echo chamber talking about how much life sucks, then to me, you're kind of in that basement dweller category, and that's super depressing. And that's where you see a lot of guys, unfortunately take their own lives and things like that.
It makes me think back to our episode about men's mental health and how, guys really need actionable things to do in order to have improvement in their mental health. So it totally makes sense that the worst thing that they could do is to just hear validation and just kind of sit in it and not do anything actionable, compared to potentially a woman possibly being able to handle that a bit better. But unfortunately, that's not the group that is needing to handle that as much as this group of men. Exactly.
So I would, say if you're in, you kind of have that realization that, okay, like the black pill is, pretty much what's going on in the dating environment right now. And there can be exaggerations and things like that. And there can be exceptions, of course. But it's really saying, okay, like, I'm not going to listen to these guys who are defeatist. If they don't talk about solutions ever, they just talk about how bad things are, then I would say, like, there's no point in doing that. Just find somebody that can give you some hope, or, because, for example, there's just one guy in our comment section. I'm not going to call his name, and he's a loyal subscriber, so, thank you. We actually share the same last name. Have you seen this guy?
No.
And so, but he's constantly saying it's over for him, and, all of this other stuff. And it's something where I, 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 I just want to, like, say to him, I think you know you are. Like, it's, there's is it truly over? Like, have you gotten a face rating? Have you gotten, have you looked maxed? Have you learned game? Have you done, all these different things before you can say it's over? Because I'm assuming, based upon his profile, like he's a younger guy.
Oh gosh, that's
not
that's
super
the
young,
worst.
not super young, not a teenager, but somebody who still can have room for improvement.
Right, and exactly that, But I think that those things, especially when it comes to learning game, like that's hard to do, right? Like it puts yourself into a very uncomfortable position.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I could see how somebody maybe hasn't tried those things, but they're looking at it and it's tough to think about doing.
Yes.
I get that. But it doesn't mean that just because like you're having difficulty getting to doing those things that the solution is that it's over.
Yeah, exactly. Well, especially since, I would say that the majority of guys who are probably sub-5 are in that category because of their weight.
And that's something that's changeable.
And that's something that's definitely changeable. People can potentially look at our podcast or look at me and say, like, I could be out of touch, but I'm really in touch because I have the ability to not only work with these guys, but also take in a lot of this material and decipher, whether it's true or not, or positive or not. And I really think that there are a lot of, good creators out there that are telling men the truth.
Right. And there's a lot of benefit to that. I mean, because if you don't know where you stand and you don't know the truth, then you're not going to take the right steps.
No.
And that's going to be the most important part. You can't just be blue-pilled. If you're not having success in what you're doing, it would be insane to continue the same thing, right, over and over and expect different results.
Of course.
So really, I think that most people will understand that.
Yes.
It's tough, I think for anyone in the manosphere or anyone that's consuming content in the manosphere and for people outside of it to put a lot of judgment on it. Right, because they can easily just say like, "Oh, those are the guys with issues," and they place the blame back on the men.
Yeah,
as with like most things.
Yes,
and so it's difficult, to have like real conversations about it and to have good understanding of what's going on.
What do you think for you personally you've learned, like in this last 6 months, that was really eye opening to you versus prior?
I think the amount of guys that are like these sub-5 guys that really are struggling and like knowing that their options are to either do the extreme of like plastic surgery or going to Southeast Asia, like those being the options. Because I just can't imagine being a woman and in any situation.
Yeah.
Those are my options.
Yeah.
Like that.
Or the third option is just kind of opting out.
Or opting out. Yeah. Like I like to put myself in their shoes at all. Like I just can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Like, no, there has to be this or that I could do.
Yeah.
Because that's my mindset. And that's, I think, the typical woman's mindset.
Yeah.
There's 10 million other things that you can do before those things. Definitely as I was creating content surrounding dating, I was hearing from different men and definitely heard some of those messages of like, I'm out, like I'm done with dating. Heard a lot of those messages. And even then, though, I didn't really know the depth of it. Like I thought, oh, these guys are just like, they had some bad dates.
Yeah.
They're frustrated. They'll get over it. They just need, some time to be by themselves. It's like such a woman's perspective, right? Because that's what women do.
Yeah.
They get frustrated about bad dates and then they just step back.
Yeah.
And then they're good after a little while.
Yeah.
But then starting this podcast and learning that, like, no, it's not that easy. Like, and it's not just about being frustrated over a few bad dates or missed connections or failed relationships. That it's actually like they're not even meeting women. They're not even talking or communicating with women. Like, that's a whole nother level.
Yeah, and these guys are a lot of times invisible to women.
Right. Yeah, just like day to day.
Yeah.
So there's like no communication.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know. Like, it's really, I don't think probably 98% of women have no idea that these types of men are even
Yeah.
struggling.
Or if they do, it's the mainstream media's narrative around this. And so, for example, if there is like a mass shooter, they'll also put incel on top of that.
That's
Do you know
true.
what I mean? But the
Yeah.
reality is that this is a tiny percentage of guys that already are, I can tell you as a clinician, like struggling with both a terrible dating market and also just having mental health issues on top of that and not getting the adequate support that they need.
Our listeners should go back and watch the interview that we did with Alexander Grace.
Yes. Yeah, because it was great. He was somebody that I was actually surprised that there wasn't as many views just because he's just such a great content
Maybe
creator.
I'll attach it to the end of this video for people at the end screen.
Yeah.
It'll pop up.
Sure. But yeah, so I think that's kind of how it's gone, is that, that most of the guys who are kind of the Chad category, that top 20%, are just not involved at all. But they're seeing this abundance of women because they do fine on dating apps. And a lot of them just aren't ready to settle down. And it's hard because we're hardwired, to want these experiences. And if everybody's telling you that you're the man if you're doing this, it's something that is going to end up hurting you in the long run if you're looking for a monogamous relationship or to start a family someday. But it's something where, the kind of culture, especially around younger guys, is that if you're successful at that, that's something where that's applauded.
Right.
Versus saying, hey, like if you're really looking towards having that marriage and family and things like that is going to work against you.
Absolutely.
And I can say that, from my own personal experience of being a younger guy and doing that type of thing, that was something that definitely hurt me. And I don't want guys to make the same mistakes that I did.
Absolutely. I think that's a great message to have out there for guys that are listening.
Also understanding, kind of the reality of the world right now. That things have changed. And, this is all backed by research and data as well. This isn't something that, we're just based upon opinion.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot. There's been tons of research studies to show a lot of different aspects of like how bad the dating market is right now and how less people in general are wanting to date because it's so bad.
Yeah.
So absolutely. It's, I think, all good discussion to have. And I think that overall, like the manosphere needed to be created. I mean, there was obviously a need for it.
Yes.
So it is just about hearing the right messages and getting the right creators that you're following and just making sure that you're not getting those messages of, you're going to be really successful in your 20s if you're hooking up with a bunch of women, as if that's going to lead to a solid monogamous relationship down the line. Because I can tell you by even just my own standpoint as a woman that would not be attractive to me for like a man to have had all these experiences with different women when I value something different in myself. Like I am seeking that same value in the man that I'm with. So you can't, like, if you're a man doing that, you have to be absolutely okay with a woman coming into your world that has done the same experiences.
Yeah.
And even then, I think it's going to be really difficult.
Yeah.
For you both to like settle down into a monogamous relationship.
Exactly. Indeed.
If you guys have enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe and watch the next one.